Rising Republican star Vivek Ramaswamy was the talk of the town after Wednesday's GOP primary debate. Here's what Ramaswamy had to say about his night on stage.
You've come into this, you've written a couple of books where you've laid out quite a lot of your philosophy, so you're not a complete newcomer to public debate, far from it. You've been writing op-eds for years, for newspapers, etc. But in political terms,
yes,
you were, in fact, you were called a rookie.
Yes.
By former Vice President Mike Pence last night. How did you enjoy the big stage?
I enjoyed it tremendously. 2 hours went right by. I thought we were just getting warmed up. And, frankly, I took it as a badge of honor that I was actually the subject of most of the arrows that came from both sides of the stage. And it was actually a good opportunity to smoke out some real ideological differences, actually, within the Republican Party. I think they're deep. And I think that I'm going to have to be the person in this race and on the debate stage who smokes that out. Should we fight foreign wars that do not directly advance American interests or not? Should we actually unapologetically advance American interests even when it comes to domestic economic policy in the face of a climate change agenda that I think is fundamentally anti-American at its core? There were real disagreements on that stage last night, and I think that's what animated much of the debate, which I think is a good thing.
Ramaswamy tweeted yesterday, "I was the only non-neocon on the stage last night. There really was no difference on foreign policy between Joe Biden, Liz Cheney, or anyone else on the stage. If you want 20 more years of endless wars that don't advance our interests, then I'm not your guy. But if you want to stay out of no-win wars and make America stronger at home, I know how to get that done."
Rising host Robbie Suave tweeted, "Vivek Ramaswamy and Ron DeSantis were the only two candidates who said they would end U.S. military funding to Ukraine. Their position is in line with 71% of GOP voters, according to an SSN RSS poll. Most other Republican candidates are pushing a foreign policy the base actively dislikes." So I think that's pretty accurate. I think there's a growing anti-interventionist sentiment in the United States. Seeing us send so much money overseas when we have problems at home is something that shows that D.C. is disconnected from the average working person in the United States of America. And so I think it's a complicated situation between Russia and Ukraine, but the U.S. sending billions, if not trillions of dollars overseas is just something that won't go over well. And I think that is going to boost DeSantis and Ramaswamy in the polls a little bit.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, look, I'm looking at Senate.gov, and it states the U.S. has given Ukraine more than $113 billion in aid. And I go back to that CNN poll that I referenced. I mean, Robbie is right in terms of Republican voters, but it's not just Republican voters who've had enough of this. Again, 55% of Americans say they do not want Congress to authorize additional funding to support Ukraine. And I understand that. I mean, you look at inflation, and Americans are having a very difficult time to pay for basic necessities. Gas prices have increased. We know how expensive it is to pay for rent, let alone get a home if you're lucky enough to even get a mortgage. And so Americans are dealing with those everyday realities and looking at how much money we're sending to a foreign country. And they're saying, well, wait a minute, what about what I'm experiencing? What about what I'm going through? Shouldn't Congress focus on us?
I think that's exactly right. When I think about how over 60% of the country said they were living paycheck to paycheck, when I think about how median rent in the United States is now $2,038, meaning that if you're earning median income in the United States, you're spending over 30% of your income on rent and you're rent burdened, people are struggling to pay for groceries. When you have 44% of the country considered a low-wage worker earning $10.66 per hour, it's going to be a tough sell to say that we need to give military aid to this other country. When people don't know how they're meeting their most basic needs at home, it doesn't even matter if the situation is dire. It doesn't matter if it's a just and moral war. None of that matters if the people at home are struggling to survive. If you can't make ends meet, it's hard to be empathetic for anyone anywhere else that is struggling. And that's where so many Americans are at. And I think DC, not understanding that reality, having so many consultants, interns, and people in the bureaucracy who make decisions, people who go on and work on political campaigns and work on that messaging, these are people that are fundamentally disconnected from what life is like for everyday working people. It's not a miscalculation when it comes to strategy. It seems as though it's never a thought in the political class's mind what life is like for everyday Americans. And that's why when candidates like Vivek Ramaswamy or Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump tap in just the tiniest bit to what that mindset is like, it sets them apart so much. They don't even have policy platforms that will address those problems, but they're speaking to the frustration. And when that's enough for someone to earn your vote, it's a really sad state of affairs for our democracy. And when we think about the political field for 2024.
I mean, look, I think it's why Trump has had so much resonance with blue-collar workers. I also think it's why Ramaswamy has had a significant amount of resonance. I mean, I'm looking here at a poll that came out on Fortune.com a couple months ago that showcases 57%, Jess, of Americans can't afford a $1,000 emergency. 4 in 10 can't afford a $400 emergency. I just really want people to put that in perspective. And so when you see our Congress authorizing and approving over $100 billion to a foreign country where most Americans do not understand the nuances of this conflict, they're thinking to themselves, well, if I have an emergency at home, who's going to look out for me? Where's the assistive programs for me? Yet we have a significant amount of money we can send overseas when we're continuously hearing the debt is rising. We don't have enough money to afford for these basic necessities, yet hundreds of billions to Ukraine. I get an emergency of $400 or $1,000. I don't know what to do. Many people look at that reality and say enough is enough. Take care of people at home. And it's why, again, Trump, Ramaswamy, and even to some respect, Ron DeSantis is doing well, because I think a lot of Americans are tired of living paycheck to paycheck. They're tired of struggling. They look at the wage gap between the wealthy and the poor. People are told work 40 hours a week, go to school, get a college degree, and you'll be able to get a home. You can put your kids through college. That isn't the reality anymore for the majority of Americans. And I think people are looking to their leaders for help, and yet the leaders are focused on another country, yet not the individual struggling right here at home.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't hear a lot of solutions from the debaters, including Vivek and Ron. We didn't hear a solution about how are we going to make working people flourish in this country. We had the promise from Mike Pence of we're going to do a continuation of the Trump-Pence tax cuts, which actually cost the country a ton of revenue and cut taxes for the ultra wealthy in the United States. It's popular opinion among most Americans that we should have taxes on people earning over $400,000. There are so many people who are making so much money off of the backs of working people in the United States. CEO pay in 1965 was 20 times the average worker at a company. Today, that figures at about 398 times the average worker at a company. When you think about how much money the ultra wealthy are making off of the work of most Americans, you really understand why wages have been stagnant since 1970, despite workers being more productive than ever. And so we need a candidate, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, speaking to that being the source of working people struggling. And until they do that, and until they come up with a platform of policy solutions, in my opinion, they haven't earned the vote of working class people.
I'll just say real quick, remember, Nikki Haley got a standing ovation when she blamed Republicans for the Trump tax cuts. More Rising right after this.